Hi, my name is Erin Toole, and I am a master's in education, secondary education student, and I am from Kansas, North Central Kansas, Washington County, and I teach art education for 4th through 12th grade students. And I chose to look up articles based on socioeconomic issues in education. And I just did a broad Google search to start with and came up with a few that way. And then I did a more specific search in my local area by searching like Kansas City Star, the Wichita Eagle, the Topeka Capital Journal, and I found some articles that way. And then I searched a few of the sites that Dr. Becker had recommended to us, and eventually came up with the 5 articles that I'm going to share with you today. All of my articles look at class and race issues as social injustices, and I found that these were very closely linked, especially in the articles that I looked at, and I think they both warranted being looked at, so I'm going to cover both of those today. My first article is from the Kansas City Star. It was entitled, "The ACT is Sobering News on School Performance," and this came out in August of this year. And in Kansas, recent ACT performance shows the persistence of a consistent gap among races and socioeconomic groups. Bob Schaefer, one of the National Center for Fair Open Testing, is quoted in this article as saying, "Performance is lagging. Significant gaps remain between affluent children and their economically disadvantaged peers. Likewise, non-Hispanic white and Asian students widen the difference between them and Black and Hispanic students." So this is 10 years after the No Child Left Behind Act, and we're still struggling with the same issues that the whole reason the act was put into place was to try to narrow that gap, and we're really not making any progress. And the ACT test is a good determination of that because it is different from the state standard test in that we can't really change our curriculum to teach to it. We can't teach to the test. And so it's a better marker of whether we're really truly making progress or not. And so according to the ACT, we're not, unfortunately. Then my next article is from the Wichita Eagle, which is found on Kansas.com, and it's called "Drop in Test Scores by African American Students Alarms Kansas Education Officials," and this was in September of this year. And the report actually came out on Tuesday, September 18th, and it showed the percentage of Kansas students meeting or exceeding standards drops for the first time in more than a decade. But even more troubling than that was that African American students, their scores fell even farther, with an 8.2% decrease in reading and a 5.3% decrease in math. This is compared to the Kansas overall drop, which was 1.9% in reading and 1% in math. And the declines were significant also among Hispanics, English language learners, students with disabilities, and those who qualified for subsidized lunch, which means you're impoverished kids. Overall, the reason for these test scores is unknown. So leaving the solution even more elusive. If we don't know what caused them, how can we change the results? So in this article, the deputy commissioner is quoted as saying, "It's too early to speculate about reasons for the lower test scores or what might be done to raise performance among ethnic groups and statewide." So that leaves us still guessing. Then I look at the article from Newsday called "Biggest Problem with U.S. Schools is Poverty." And this looks at a lot of results from a survey done in 2009 for the Program for International Student Assessment. And this is a battery of tests that's given to 15-year-old students from 34 different countries. And all of these countries are members of an organization called the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, which is an international organization that helps governments tackle the economic and social and governance challenges of a globalized economy. So these are all, advanced countries, okay? And in this test, U.S. students ranked 14th out of all 34 countries, and all of these countries are relatively affluent, so we're not talking third world countries here. So 14th is really not where we want to be in the center of the pack here. But if we look at it from a socioeconomic standpoint, we look a lot better. If we only take out the schools where fewer than 10% of the students are in poverty, and we put those up against these other 34 countries, we're first in the nation. And that 10% marker is significant because those schools, those other countries, the 10% line, they don't have more than 10% of their students in poverty. So this is a good marker for us, especially to the countries that are that are ranked higher than us. So, and even if we would look at schools where fewer than 25% of our students are impoverished, we're still third. And if we look at it at 50%, we're still well above the number 14, where we came in overall. So this link between poor families and the poor school performance is significant, and it has been noted in other places as well, such as the SAT, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and trends in international math and science studies. So it's not just this report. Also, in this report, he talks about the UNICEF Child Poverty Rate Study, which was done this year. And in it, we were ranked second. And this is from a ranking of economically advanced nations, and our percentage is 23% poverty, compared to like Germany, which is 8.5%, and Canada, which is 13.3%, Japan, which is 14.9%. So our poverty rate is significant. Ask states in his article, if American kids who aren't poor are doing so well, maybe our problem isn't bad teachers or inadequate school spending or indifferent parents or screen-besotted children. Maybe the problem is simply poverty and the shameful fact that we have so much more of it than any other comparable country. So in the next article from the Heritage Foundation titled The Myth of Racial Disparities in Public School Funding, it also used the same survey, but it looked at it from race a little bit. And it talks about that if we had just taken out the U.S. whites instead, we also would have ranked third overall. But if we had taken out only the U.S. Hispanics, we would rank 31st, or only the U.S. blacks, we would rank 33rd. So that gap is significant and obviously a social injustice for our children. That we are doing such a dramatic difference in how well our students are performing. In this article, the author states that those evaluating our current education system make two mistaken assumptions when trying to solve this educational injustice. He says, number one, increasing school spending has rarely led to better outcomes, and number two, more fundamentally, based on data from the U.S. Department of Education itself, the assumed funding disparities between racial and ethnic groups do not exist. And he uses this chart to back up some of those findings. And this chart is from U.S. Department of Education, and it was taken from a survey in 2006-2007 school year. And it shows that raw per pupil spending is similar across racial and ethnic groups. And with cost of living adjustments, Asian and Hispanic students receive slightly less money than whites, while blacks receive slightly more, with a more dramatic difference in the Northeast. And you'll see that here. The blacks receive 109%, white 100% here, Hispanic 107%, and Asian 102%. But if you look at all of them throughout, they're all very close. And usually the discrepancy is towards more spending towards the black population. So this article, of course, talks about, it doesn't refute the claim that the difference in achievement is caused, or it does refute the claim that the difference of achievement is caused by lack of funding. And he talks about how this is different than what the whole statement was early on when we advocated for like Title I and things like that by the NAACP, which said that unequal school funding was the cause of lower minority achievement. So now we're saying the new view is the cause must be problems outside the classroom, and spending is only considered equal if it's high enough to remediate the problem. So he even purports that, if this theory is played out, it could imply that no level of school funding could ever be considered equal as long as achievement disparities remain. So how far do we go and how much money can we throw at this problem? And of course he doesn't offer a solution because he's only refuting the claim instead of offering solutions. And I don't know if anybody knows what the solution is. So obviously the NCLB Act was in Title I was meant to address this problem, but it's only proven that this problem is not easy to fix. The solution is evasive. As a nation, we can't solve this problem with legislation, obviously, and funding. So what can I do if the nation can't solve it? What can I do as a teacher to combat this social injustice problem of race and class with my own students? And unfortunately, I don't have the answer, but I can look at what does not work. And one of the articles I looked at um, was from Education Week, and it was called Learning from Success. And it talked about some of the ideologies in education that unsuccessful schools have. And one of those was that student intelligence is fixed. So a student is either dumb or they're smart, and there's nothing you can do to change that, and that is just how it's going to be. People are just that way. Second is that students should be taught in a light fashion. So a school in a high crime area should not focus on maintaining order, and a school in a low income community cannot employ teacher rather than student centered instruction. We must all teach the same way. That's the way it should be done. And thirdly, schools cannot improve without broad social change. Real educational improvement only occurs after broader social changes, is the quote. And it says, schools, therefore, are dependent on other forces rather than acting on their own. On one side, this is stated that schools cannot improve without increased economic equality. And from the other side, certain intellectuals argue that broken families alone determine student success. And once again, schools cannot do anything about it. Research shows that neither view is accurate. So as a temporary solution in my own classroom, or perhaps even more of as a coping mechanism, I choose to remember those rare stories, but enduring, of how one student managed to rise above their circumstances, to rise above their, issues with race or issues with social and economic statuses, and they, were successful in their education. They made something of themselves. They broke the cycle of poverty, and maybe because one inspiring teacher helped them along the way. And because of that belief that as a teacher I can change lives, I could be that one inspiring teacher, I choose to teach based on these ideologies. I choose to teach that student intelligence is variable, that no one is dumb or no one is smart, that everybody is teachable, and we can help every student. I choose to teach that different students call for different approaches. Different students need different things, and that's okay. And equal doesn't mean everybody has to be treated the same. Equal means that students need to be treated the way they need to be treated in order to learn. And I also agree to teach that social change is not the only means to success, although it would be beneficial to see some social change. I cannot sit around and wait for that social change to happen, or it's too late for the kids that I'm teaching. So above all, as a teacher, I must be willing to continually change. I must be willing to look at other teachers and see what they're doing. I must be willing to do research. I must be willing to continually change my lessons plans, to never be settled and comfortable with the things I'm teaching. I must be looking for new ways to reach the students that I have not been able to reach before. I must be willing to be okay with just teaching that one student who's going to rise above his circumstances and change, even if it's only one student in my lifetime. And hopefully it's more than that, so that I may decrease the gap by one.